Are online brackets oversaturated? I recently watched that Hotashi video where he opines about the state of online tournaments, and while I will say that I don't disagree with him as much as I expected to, I do think that his particular angle on the situation is somewhat warped by being a top player and frankly isn't terribly helpful to TOs looking to improve their events. To summarize, his main points of contention are A. There's a zillion tournaments out there and they all feel samey. B. The same handful of people dominate all of the big ones, and C. At the same time, they fail to draw in certain other notable players that Hotashi wants to see more of, such as Jonathan Tene, Romola, and others, along with new and up-and-coming players. And to solve these issues, he wants fewer tournaments, higher production value, and specific incentives for top players to come through. He also praises beginner brackets and events with novel formats like the Run It Thursdays matchmaking events. I feel like there's a conflation going on here between competitive fighting games as a professional sport and competitive fighting games at a hobbyist and amateur level. The big-time online GGST brackets like Camp and Never Sleeps or Can Opener, NLBC or WNF, which are both now defunct unfortunately, and Series E, which now has an in-house open bracket, exist in a different competitive space from the plurality of online events that are run out of one-off Discord servers that cater to their own small communities. Hotashi implying that only the former is worthwhile while holding both to the same standards comes off as surprisingly myopic. It's as if a player on an MLB team acted confused about why there's all these local amateur leagues all over the place if the American and National Leagues already exist. Who cares about the San Gabriel Valley Bandits? Don't they know the Dodgers exist? What's the point of the Liberty Bell Men's Baseball League if only the Phillies have Kyle Schwarber or Bryce Harper? What's the point of a tiny state like Massachusetts having like 50 over 30 leagues? Fundamentally, these types of competitive scenes serve vastly different purposes, and there's ample room for both in their respective sports. Big events that feature top players demonstrate what the peaks of achievement in the sport look like, and provide spectators with commentary and on-screen aids to help follow the moment-to-moment decision-making behind plays. And as Hotashi says, they also have to be worthwhile for a top player to participate in, ideally monetarily, but also in terms of other competition present. I would tend to agree with him that Series E is probably one of the best examples of this currently, though for full disclosure, I'm currently event staff for the Series E Open brackets and was a volunteer bracket runner for WNF Strive before that. Thanks to ESA being backed by Walmart's money and clout, they can organize sponsorships for their players so they get regular payouts for competing in their league, which is much more sustainable than trying to fight over pot money alone. Ideally, I'd love to see more circuits like that pop up, but as always, money in esports is kind of an oxymoron, so who knows when that will be. Meanwhile, the other type of event entirely serves grassroots interests. The myriad tiny online locals are first and foremost social spaces for players who are invested in the sport and enjoy playing competitively, but lack the time or energy to hone their skills to the level of the aforementioned top players. Your online local is a spot players go because their friends are there and they can meet new people to fight and learn from, as well as experience higher stakes competition than just playing ranked. The commentary is probably just the TO shooting the breeze, the stream is probably only watched by the entrants, and Grands is between two local killers nobody else has heard of. But those are all secondary concerns as long as everyone's having fun. These events fill the same niche that offline locals did pre-COVID, without the limitations of being locked to people living within 20 minutes of the venue. Having said that, I think there are some other things that both classes of event could stand to improve. While Hotashi's takes are definitively from the perspective of being a top player, an experience I really can't speak to, I have some other observations from the perspective of a TO, a spectator, and a mid-level player myself. In general, I think most online events don't do enough to court the grassroots demographic and build communities with intentionality. One of the biggest shortcomings I've personally run up against is the homogenization of start times. Most Strive brackets I see, large and small, run on an East Coast schedule. While several East Coast players were justifiably angry with WNF that one time Top 8 got delayed by 2 hours and finished well after midnight, the opposite issues plague West Coast players. Most Strive brackets start around 4 to 5 p.m. our time to accommodate East Coasters, but in doing so they exclude many would-be entrants with a day job or afternoon classes in this time zone. As a result, survivorship bias creates an impression that all the best players in this game are on the East Coast, when in reality there just aren't enough spaces for West Coast players to grow and compete. If more events were to pop up on West Coast time, it would increase the diversity of the sport at both low and high levels. This also causes issues because if everyone is running brackets in roughly the same time slot, then that encourages more players to sign up for a bunch of stuff happening simultaneously. This is a nightmare and a half for TOs, who now have to do custody battles with each other over who gets Razzo and Marbella this weekend, and for other players who are stuck waiting around with nothing to do. As a quick case study, we can look at how the transition between WNF Strive and Series E's Open Bracket has been going. While the former was notable for featuring a unique pool of players from SoCal, Vegas, Mexico, and PNW, in addition to periodic guest appearances from Midwest and East Coast staples, the new start time has dramatically reduced the proportion of entrants from those regions to mainly just Mike Zaptic, Trevor Tsu, Nubenheimer, Stealthy, and Red Ditto, along with the couple dozen East Coasters that enter literally everything who Hotashi mentions in the video. And of course, being scheduled at the same time as TNS, we've had to haggle with those TOs to get our matches completed, which added a full hour onto our runtime one week. I also think the majority of online weeklies fail when it comes to community building. Think of how an ideal local works. You show up and get some friendlies in on open setups, you play your tourney sets, and then crucially you have the ability to stick around the venue and spectate other matches with the crowd and play rotations on setups open back up. There's lots of opportunities to socialize with other players through the whole experience, and you're incentivized to stay in the venue all evening. Online brackets often seem to lack that appeal, and I think a lot of the reason why is because there's not much to do once you're out. Mathematically, a full quarter of entrants will go 0 to 2 in every double elim bracket as a function of the format, and many others will drown in pools soon after. If there's nowhere for them to go to continue engaging with the community, they'll just say GG's and wander off to do other stuff. This is especially deadly to players new to a community who may not have any friends there yet to anchor them. While a failure to provide a community space in smaller online locals is a death sentence, it's important for online majors to keep in mind as well. As Hotashi points out, many large events feel stagnant, and this is in part because they're not bringing in enough new blood down bracket to keep things interesting. More grassroots engagement also makes it possible to start top players and regional besties further apart in the bracket, which means seeding is less immediately thorny. That said, seeding quickly becomes a prickly issue when you have well above 8 players with a credible shot at top 8 no matter what. Streaming pools is one bare-bones way to keep people engaged with the community. For WNF Strive, Light maintained the pool stream in addition to our work running the bracket, and I was always busy with the regular entrants and people who had been eliminated or were waiting for sets. Viewership was a fraction of what Top 8 pulled over on Vaya's stream, but it still served an important purpose with respect to community cohesion. This is definitely something I've been missing through the transition to working Series E's Open Bracket, and I'm curious to see how it affects our ability to regrow the community. There's also a lot of untapped potential in non-elimination formats. Hotashi shouts out Run It Thursday's use of the Start.gg matchmaking system to appeal to a wider range of players, and I concur that other events should consider following their example. The format allows players to keep running it well after they've fallen out of contention for the top 8 cut, and its exceptionally loose schedule is great for accommodating players outside of the East Coast region. Folks out here can just drop in whenever they get off work, and folks on the East Coast can bail once it gets late. They're relatively low effort to run as well, since TOs don't have to spend as much time tracking down wandering players, and seeding is basically irrelevant. An ambitious online weekly could probably even try running a matchmaking event in the background of a regular double E limit bracket in order to simulate the feel of having friendly setups to retreat to at a local venue. This is frankly something I'm itching to try eventually, and will probably manifest itself somehow in Wild West Guilty Gear's slate of tournaments sooner or later. Light and I have also gushed at length about Swiss format before for similar reasons. Swiss manages to finish in the same number of rounds as an equivalently sized single elim bracket, though each round may take a bit longer, while also serving players all throughout the rankings with sets against other players close in skill the whole time. The seeding is also much simpler than in double elim and only really affects the first round. From there, it's all down to player performance. We've been using this format for our Wild West intermediate brackets since spring of this year, and it's been massively popular with the community. Like matchmaking, this is a built-in function on Start.gg, and is also supported by Challenge, though I haven't experimented with it on that site myself. In general, there's lots of room to experiment with format to keep things fresh, appeal to new kinds of players, and build community, and I encourage other TOs to do that. Matchmaking, group formats, seasonal leagues and playoffs, teams, one-off gimmicks, it's all good stuff. Hotashi also mentions beginner and intermediate brackets as a useful break from the monoculture, and plugs Hoop Squad in particular. This is obviously a type of tournament I'm very much in favor of, seeing as Wild West Guilty Gear is planning on pivoting to almost exclusively running intermediate level events over the course of the next 6 months or so. The graduation system guarantees recurring events won't stagnate from the domination of a few strong players, and the intermediate demographic seems like the most invested in individual tournaments and communities in general. We can always count on the Wild West gang to be communicative and give us feedback when we post polls to the Wild West Guilty Gear Discord, while the top players have mostly ignored these attempts. Aside from that, I think the most active FGC community I've ever seen is Bracket About Nothing, who also mainly run beginner events, always has a crowd of people in voice chat running lobbies, and has numerous boards and channels where players ask for advice and exchange knowledge. To me, Bracket About Nothing seems like kind of the perfect fighting game community. I want to study them under a microscope. The elephant in the room with most of what I've mentioned is the ever-looming threat of TO burnout. Just like how most tabletop dungeon masters are just some guy who grabbed some modules and stepped up to facilitate a fun activity for their friend group, most TOs are also just some guy who decided to take up a support role in their community. The DM of a tabletop group is just another player participating in the game from a different angle than the party, and the same relationship holds between most TOs and the players they're running brackets for. TOs typically either aren't paid or aren't paid much. All of my work for WNF has been purely on a volunteer basis, same with Light, and with Ruben and Hirsch before us. The result is that there isn't a lot keeping core event staff in place besides passion and wanting to have a good time. And if the work stops being enjoyable, then that's it, the TOs bail and the event can't run unless somebody else steps up. This is what happened to WNF's Guilty Gear brackets a year ago when Light and I first took the reins, and it's what happened when NLBC closed their online brackets earlier this year, and it'll happen again someday in a tournament near you. A lot of what I'm suggesting here are things that I believe will help the spectator and player side of things, but I also believe they make the position of TO more rewarding. Running tournaments that overlap start times with other more popular tournaments sucks. Running the same type of event every week is boring. Dealing with players being catty or toxic is fucking miserable. So if you don't absolutely have to, don't. Experiment with a weird format, drop an ultimatum on that moron who's causing you trouble, and most of all, cater to the crowd that's appreciative of the effort you're putting in.